this race, I'd be curious from your perspective, what happened with this race, where certainly I was part of the race. I don't think I had much to do much to do with some of like the state wins and losses down the stretch, since it seems like a lot of it came down to South Carolina and some other places. So if you remember the DNC, then you remember when Pete Buttigieg ran for head of the DNC.
Oh yeah, I do. I was supporting Keith Ellison at the time. Congressman Ellison was my candidate.
Yeah. So when you probably saw Pete speak to the DNC at various times. Like, was there an inkling then? It's like this guy's gonna run for president in a hot minute. Like, where is any sense of that?
I heard those rumblings. I mean, for me, I didn't give it a thought. I mean, I was laser focused on Congressman Keith Ellison. But now that I think back on it, yeah, I do remember people saying that he had that itch, so to speak. Yeah. So I wasn't surprised to see him run.
So the Bernie 2020 campaign, there was a period when I thought Bernie was going to win the race. I think a lot of people did. Like that when you looked at it, I mean, Bernie and Pete were essentially the co-winners coming out of Iowa, depending upon how you look at it. And then everyone,
you know how I look at it. We won Iowa, but go ahead, yeah.
Well, for what it's worth, for what it's worth, I tweeted the same. I was like, I think Bernie won Iowa. Now let's go on to the next one. It was just because I thought it's like, well, the man got more votes.
That's it. The popular but you see how they changed the rules? You done opened up Pandora's box on that. See, the popular vote didn't count for our campaign at the time. They changed the rules on us in Iowa. But we went on to make history. We won the first 3 contests, technically. I mean, that was a big deal. And we still were written off by the media.
There was a head of steam. So you win Iowa, and I said as much. Win New Hampshire, which people expected, but it was still a romp. And then coming out of Nevada, it was like Bernie. I was quoted as saying it too. I was like, it's a great chance Bernie runs the table here. So tell me about those days, because I've been now part of my own campaign, and you have like a head of steam momentum. When things don't go well, you feel like you're on, like, this is what I felt like. This is the first time I've described it this way. We'll see if it works. So you know those medieval movies when they're like a bunch of people on horse, like a Braveheart type charge or like this. That's what it felt like when you're on like the campaign trail. You're like riding and doing rallies and all these people volunteering for your campaign and energizing you. And then when things go poorly, in a race, it feels like that scene in that movie when like the horses fall, like there's like this, pit, and then like the horses go, oh, and then like you're all like sort of on the ground and everyone's scrambling around, and people are getting stabbed right and left. At least that's the way the movie goes. So that's where things go poorly. But when things are going well, it feels like you're never going to lose. It feels like we've got the wind at our back and everything's going our way, and we will not be denied. I'd love to hear what it was like from your perspective, like heading in and out of Iowa in the early states.
It's almost an indescribable feeling, especially since I was with the senator in 2016, and just to see that kind of momentum. I felt as though the seeds we planted, as I reflected state by state, I felt like the seeds we planted in 2016 were bearing fruit in 2020. That's how it felt. And it's like a snowball rolling down a mountain, right? You're picking up that pace and rolling fast and building. And by the time we got to Nevada, and when those results came in, because I was the one in Nevada and I stayed there to give the speech to our supporters in person there on the senator's behalf. And I mean, it was smoking. You hear me? Because what Nevada proved, because remember, all the naysayers said, oh yeah, Iowa is white. Totally disregarding the black people and other people of color that live in that state. But I digressed. New Hampshire is white. So again, totally.
And Bernie's neighboring state.
Right.
So they'd be like, yeah.
Nothing. It didn't mean anything. But when we got to Nevada, baby, They couldn't deny it. They couldn't deny the diversity. And he won, especially young people, the African American community, our Hispanic community. He won communities of color in Nevada, along with our white sisters and brothers. So he couldn't be denied. And to me, I think that is the moment when the neoliberal, when the power structure of the Democratic Party decided we got to put a stop to this. I really do believe that. And South Carolina did us in, and it wasn't enough time between South Carolina and the other states for us to regroup.
I have never seen an endorsement have an impact like Jim Clyburn coming out for Joe Biden in South Carolina. That was unbelievable. It was like someone had just taken like a pin out of a dike or a dam or something like that, where all of a sudden Clyburn was like, "I'm for Joe," and then all of a sudden, whoosh! Like this freaking tide of voters in South Carolina followed his lead. I genuinely think that that one endorsement changed the course of the nomination and the race entirely, the course of history, really.
You feel that way. Imagine how we felt. When I tell you we worked extraordinarily hard in that state, we worked harder in that state than the Biden campaign. I know that unequivocally. We were in that state early. We didn't take anything for granted. We had people coming in and out of that state, our national surrogates, people who you and I both admire, like Dr. Cornel West made several trips to that state. Brother, the lethal weapon himself, Danny Glover, who was beloved across generations. He even drove, Yank, Brother Danny Glover drove from one end of South Carolina to the other, drove himself. He would be in that state sometimes when even I wasn't. I adopted that state. Even though I traveled all over the country, I visited South Carolina more than any other state, going to all kinds of events, bringing people in, Susan Sarandon, Tim Robbins, I mean, you name it, in and out, all age groups. Philip Agnew from the Dream Defenders, who I know you know. I mean, just from millennials to boomers to Gen Xers, you name it. We put so much effort. And that South Carolina team worked so hard, and we knew our backs were against the wall. So although it didn't have the outcome that we wanted, we worked and didn't take it for granted. And you're absolutely right. When Congressman Clyburn came up in there, it totally turned that entire thing around. Vice President Biden up until that point had never won the primary, and all the times he had run for president until that particular moment. And then the coalescing of everybody else on that ticket. You might not necessarily agree with me, but when you got the number 2 candidate in the race so far drop out and endorse, Vice President Biden, you got Senator Klobuchar did the same thing. Others did. Hey, that was it. That was all she wrote. And then COVID hit too. So you got all of that plus COVID. Bam. End of our run.
I feel your pain. I was trying to describe that sort of the charge, like the high of feeling like you're gonna win, and then that dispiriting uh, feeling that you can't describe too when you realize you might not win, or when you realize like, oh my gosh, like as hard as we fought and scratched and clawed here in South Carolina to try and win every vote, it may not go our way. It's why we, in some ways, do what we do, where the only way you can succeed in this kind of politics and activism is if you're putting your heart and soul into it, or else it's impossible. That's one thing that people don't appreciate fully, where they think it's like, oh, you could be doing it for some kind of self-serving reason. It's like, you try doing this for any length of time for any reason other than the fact that you genuinely are trying to fulfill like a vision that someone else has or you have, or think you can improve people's way of life. Because it's and so you put your heart and soul and energy into it, and then when it doesn't go your way, it's devastating. It is so hard to just like pick yourself up after that and be like, well, that like, especially in your case, because you'd been grinding it out for years.
5 years. When the senator created our revolution, as you know, after 2016, and I got the opportunity to run that organization. Then he ran again. So yes, 5 years. In 5 years, I physically touched down in almost 50 states. I think there are only 3 states that I did not physically go to over the last
Wow.
5 years. Yeah, I gave it my all. Yeah, really.
We know you did, Nina. I mean, it's why you have so much admiration among so many of us, is that we know you're a warrior and that you've been fighting the fight on the ground, in the air, on the airwaves, like wherever it needs to be fought. Like now in your earbuds. Nina's got a podcast that I'm going to go on in a minute.
Hello, somebody is the podcast.
Hello, somebody. There we go. Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do subscribe to Yang Speaks and click on notifications so we can let you know every time we have a new episode.